Anyway, looking at the agenda, the attendances, I've had apologies for Denise Weston, and I think, did you say
Michael Young?
Michael Young
on the sheet.
Yeah, Michael Young. Whether anybody joined us later, I don't know.
There's another apology typed on the sheet as well. I think
right.
It's gone there. Is Rob Chilton? No. On the actual sheet going round, I think there were two printed apologies, and Denise Weston was written in. Yeah, Steve.
Anyway, if they're in, they will be recorded anyway. So, right. Yeah. Can I just remind members that the meeting will be webcast, as all our meetings are now. Item 2 is the minutes of the previous meeting. Can we agree those as a correct record? Yeah.
Indeed.
Okay. Item 3, declarations of interest. If any members got any declarations of interest, please let us know. Item 4, questions from members of the public. I don't have any. Item 5 is the overview and scrutiny review of the executive's draft budget proposals. I assume everybody's actually read the report. We do have a summary. I think you will recall we had 2 budget meetings, one that concentrated on the adult and children's health and social care. Obviously, it's a big part of the council's budget, and the second meeting was the remainder of the general budget. There was a number of key messages, and that's listed and with some text around it on page 10. The delayed transfer of care. Members welcome the improved performance in relation to delayed transfer of care and acknowledge the hard work of the officers in improving the performance in this area. Clearly, the scrutiny members felt that improvements can still be made, and will continue to monitor that particular element of service via the Health and Scrutiny Committee work programme during the coming year. The demand-led services, as always, and in previous years, it is a demand-led service. Any increase in projected demand could cause a significant budget shortfall. So again, scrutiny will continue to monitor the adult and social care services through the scrutiny committees of children and young people and the health scrutiny. We did look at the budget reserves, and over the last few years, the reserves have decreased, and it's something that members felt that the executive will need to keep a close eye on the reserves to ensure that they can meet any given eventuality. Scrutiny did welcome the fact that a balanced budget was proposed for the coming year, but noted that potential future shortfall of something around £25 million by the end of 21-22. And members acknowledge that the current financial climate for local authorities remain challenging. I think we all recognise that. But Scrutiny would like to like assurances that proposals are already being discussed on how the potential shortfall will be addressed, and I'm sure that the executive members will be doing that. Finally, and in addition, a motion was agreed at the last full council meeting on the 28th of November, which committed the council to declare a climate emergency. The motion also called for the establishment of a new task and finish group, which should seek advice from experts to develop a carbon budget and set a challenging target date for carbon neutrality in Trafford. So the hiring of these experts would generate a cost, and therefore Scrutiny will be asking that a budget be made available to seek the relevant advice to inform the task and finish group's work. You will note the action plan is set out on pages 13 and 14, which I've just alluded to, really. Are there any comments that anybody wants to make? No? Well, obviously, this report will go to the executive. That is a recommendation that is on page 7, that the Scrutiny Committee endorse the Budget Scrutiny Report for referral to the Executive for their consideration at their meeting on the 28th of January. I think I'd just like to put it on record my thanks to the executive members and officers for all their hard work in, working on the budget. It's not an easy task to do, and I think they've done a good job in ensuring that the budget will balance without any loss of service. So if everybody's happy with that, can we agree the recommendations? Yep.
Agree.
Good. Item 6, process for managing and introducing traffic regulation orders. This is just a report. I don't know, Steve, are you going to speak on this?
Yes, although I wasn't quite sure exactly what to expect tonight.
Well, I think, yeah, I think...
I can speak to the report, yes.
Yeah, I think it's been mentioned at previous scrutiny committees before I became the chair. And I think, Chris, you...
Yeah, I'll say something after Stephen.
Right, okay.
Chip in with some...
Yeah, I'll just try and quickly go through it all, what's here. Because I'm not quite sure exactly what the outcome it will be of the meeting and so forth. But obviously, in section 2 there, obviously it talks about some reasons why a TRO would be introduced. And obviously, it's mainly to do with road safety for all pedestrians, the safety of cyclists or for other road users, or indeed for the safety of the environment locally. And it's actually facilitate and make sure that everything that use that road can do it in a safe manner. And it's actually conducive to actually helping the environment rather than actually in terms of a lot of the problems that can be generated by misuse. Obviously, it's obviously in most cases we are talking about vehicular traffic here, so it's actually making sure that it's suitable. Or indeed, so if we have things like HGVs might be coming down roads that are unsuitable, or areas that particularly say maybe used for rat running and so forth. So it's obviously about making it a better environment for the people that live there. I think just talk about there's more prescribed rules and regulations around it. In fact, things around highways are so prescribed, it's unbelievable. A few years ago, in order to bring in a traffic regulation order or TROs, simply referred to, they have to be advertised in the London Gazette, no matter how small. You have to advertise this thing called the London Gazette, which I've never actually seen, but I know it exists. And that, thankfully, a few years ago, that was actually stopped because there's actually a cost element to that, but it actually served no real purpose. But obviously, we still do a lot of local issues on that one. In terms of locally, it can be a lot of local issues there, obviously, and things that do happen is think that no one has a right to use a particular highway, no matter who that user is. She's actually looking at that. Everyone should use it in a manner that's conducive to that, helping people. But obviously, some people obviously do think that they can have exclusive use of that for whatever reason that particular is. Obviously, it talks about residential areas, and obviously most roads go down, they are part of this, and it's a big factor with the amount of vehicles that we have through residential areas these days. And we have introduced a number of resident parking schemes over the years, and as you are aware, there's a whole bunch of schemes currently going through consultation at the moment over the next couple of years before many of them will be introduced. And obviously they do involve a lot of consultation, so I'm not sure how familiar that every member is here with them. So obviously, like what's at the moment, we do an initial consultation first to gauge interest. So at that point in time, there are no proposals. It's just to see if residents are interested in actually having a permit scheme. That might be because of commuters parking up in the area. It might be you have a local shopping centre where or an office box where it's actually been filled up all day long. And whilst it does say in the report, particularly, it's mainly for people with no off-road parking. That is still true in one sense, but obviously we do put them in where a lot of parking can create problems in the location, and in some cases it's resulted in whole driveways being completely blocked up and the like, and it's we get too many in there, it can cause a lot of problems. Then it's also usually problems for emergency services, maybe problems for refuse collection vehicles. So I think in many cases we have to actually look at calming the whole area down. And there are sometimes some problems with the number of passes, because the general rule we work to is if you have no driveway or no off-road facilities, you're usually entitled for up to 2 passes. If you have a driveway, off-road facilities, you're normally entitled to 1 pass in that sense. And part of the problem is in some areas, you might get some larger families have more than 2 vehicles, but that in itself, particularly in areas where there's actually no permit parking schemes, can actually cause problems, where the problem itself might not be as much, or I should say, it can be the same as commuters and parking there, but it can also be where the amount of vehicles on the road is generated by residents themselves that's actually causing a lot of the issues there. And this isn't always understood by people when they start coming for 3 and even 4 permits. I've actually seen, and if you did that, sometimes it can invalidate what a permit system is for. So, I mean, I think each scheme is looked at carefully, though, I think, to see what the issues actually are. But the aim is obviously to try and facilitate residents where we can actually do them. So it's obviously, we do talk about proposals, how they're done. And obviously they are obviously all advertised in the local newspaper, although with the lack of distribution of things like the Messenger these days, I don't know how that works out. But obviously the big issue there, of course, is that they will be done by letter drop to all people. So every household that's affected in there, it will receive a letter drop on that one. And it was saying that what they're given 21 days to actually comment on that. Then at the end of those proposals, if it's a permit scheme, they'll be considered, and a scheme will be drawn up if the support for resident support, it should say, and then that is then formally advertised again, and we'll go through a second round of consultation. And should there be consensus to support that scheme, that's fine. But quite often we find that there are a lot of different issues raised, and sometimes it might be necessary to rethink parts of the scheme and even have a third round of consultation in that respect. So all these can take 18 months to get in, and then if you get support for it, you've then got to obviously implement the scheme, which itself in a large area can take quite a lot of time, some of the bigger schemes. So it's not by any means a quick process. And of course, if you have major objections, that can actually hold things up. Obviously, in there we do talk about what they actually are, the contraventions, and it's obviously the statutory bodies are consulted, the emergency services, the bus operators, and actually local businesses where it's relevant, they may need to do that. And obviously these are all taken into account in that sense. So a parking scheme is more straightforward, but obviously similar will apply in one round of consultation only for other traffic regulation orders, which might be implementation of road closure, one-way system, those sorts of things. The exception there, where we're talking 0.7, is an experimental traffic order, which some of you may be familiar with some of those that we've done recently. Particularly, we've done one in Altrincham at a bridge there, where it was due to damage, so we actually did put in some immediate restrictions there. So they weren't subject to consultation, but obviously that an order was put in there for an experimental, and at the end of the experimental period, it'll look at the impact this actually have, both in some cases residential areas or indeed businesses, and obviously they will take formal consultation at the end of that and actually see the effect it's had and actually listen to what people say, and obviously bring in the changes if it's deemed to still be necessary. Or I think in the case of like the Broadheath one we did in Broadheath there, that was decided that it wasn't supported in that sense, and it was simply abandoned at that point there, following a consultation. So obviously there is in an experimental, it does say in point 8 that there is no right to object to an experimental order, as in the case of the Alton Bridge, it was there to actually stop driving, which is actually a real hazard. Obviously, when you go down other matters there, I don't want to comment too much on 9 there, because that's more of a case for an officer to comment on some of the technicalities there and so forth. But obviously, there is always assessments on costs before any scheme can be put in, particularly like parking schemes. Well, any scheme will actually have a cost, and it could be simply planning a scheme, consultation, and then it's actually things like road markings, the sign making that goes up. And signs are actually really, really expensive. And then, of course, in things like permit schemes, there's their own monitoring and implementation and enforcement, but obviously they'll be enforced by our own parking attendants. In the case of like other orders like one-way systems and others, it's set down for police enforcement. So part of the process does include discussions with the police as to whether the police think they would be enforceable. Because sometimes if we can put a scheme in and the police aren't willing to support it, then obviously it can build up to expectations from local residents. And that's one of the things we have to be mindful of in that sense. There's no point putting an order in if simply from day one it's not going to be enforced, and it serves little purpose. So we need to actually look at ways that can actually work with residents in that sense to get something that is actually workable. So I'm not sure what else you expect in that sense, but it's actually, I'll try and assist with some questions, but there's obviously an officer was supposed to come in here tonight and don't know what's happened to him. I did message him at the start of the meeting, and Richard did say that Simon Dale was coming, but I don't know why he isn't here. But I'll try and answer questions where I can. Of course, you can actually always, of course, follow up questions to us on that one, and we'll get them answered for you. I hope that's helpful.
Okay, yeah, thanks for that, Steve. Chris, did you, because you kind of instigated
well,
this.
If you're, sorry, everybody. If you just bear with me for a few minutes, actually, I'll give you a bit of my history behind TROs. In that, on the 4th of January 2016, the 3 Brooklands councillors and a couple of officers from Amy and the then exec member and a local police inspector sat down and spoke about all the traffic parking issues in Brooklands ward, which are big because they all relate to the Metrolink. And what was being said was, oh, there's all these things that are in the pipeline. They're all pending. And I said, okay, can you tell us what they all are? Mainly because I might think that a certain thing in Brooklands was really important, but if I didn't know what all the other ones were, I couldn't actually judge how important it was compared with some of the others that were in the pipeline. To cut the next long story short, council actually agreed that they would ask the relevant department to produce the list, a matrix of what actually was, quote, outstanding. And I chased a gentleman by then at Amy called Steve Tilby, and he promised me for the 31st of March 2017, delivered it in June 2017, 2 lists. One of which was for traffic regulation orders, which they expected to implement in 17-18, of which there were 36 on the list. And the other list was a pending sort of been discussed, not decided whether it might proceed or not list, which in order of priority then, things can move up and down the list. There were 139, many of which went back to 2008. And the comment there being, I think, as Stephen's alluded to, that we had residents who had been told in 2012 or 2010 that something was going to happen. And yet 5, 6, 7 years later, nothing had happened and nothing seemed to be happening. So that's when I sort of really cottoned on to the fact that these were, quite ridiculous to have this huge number, etc. Now, bringing us right up to date, my understanding at the moment is that this current year and next year will see a huge amount of action on all these pending things to actually get some of them are being grouped together. I know the Brooklands ones are, because we've got like a yellow line rather than a residence parking thing. There's all sorts of biggish schemes going on to actually clear up a lot of these things that are on this huge long list. That's my comment. My only request is there any possibility that reporting on the state of those pending things could actually be added into the annual delivery plan? Actually, could we get ongoing report statistic on an annual or half yearly basis as to where we're up to, so that we don't get into this situation ever again?
Yeah.
Because as you can appreciate, and I'm sure you also have found it enormously frustrating when you don't know what's going on, and then the resident will show you an email. I can think of one in particular. Show you an email from an officer of the council in 2012 saying something's going to happen on Woodbourne Road by the end of next year. Now that officer doesn't even work for the council anymore. So, thank you.
So basically, so basically, what you're calling for is some kind of recording of an action plan on a kind of 6 monthly basis or something.
Yeah,
an update on
I'm
6
totally
months,
aware
so that everybody knows where they sit in terms of a scheme that has either been proposed or is in the pipeline or is near to coming to the top of the list or whatever. I think it's reasonable, but it's whether it's ever been done before, and can it be done in the future? Before I bring you in, Steve, I know Ray just wanted to.
Thank you, Chair. Very briefly, I think it's becoming more and more important, this, because of the volume of traffic now of all shapes and sizes on our roads. And if I could just mention on the list of Trows here, there's one there, number 8, Ridgeway Road, Timperley. That's been going on for several years, and it's a very a narrow road that's been obstructed by traffic and a nursery in the same road, and it's been the consultations have taken place several times. It takes several months. It's just. I think the main thing is to try, if we can, to speed this process up. I think it's taking far too long, and that's just one example, and I'm sure there's many more.
Okay, Steve, have you got any?
Yeah, I mean,
can you help us on this one?
Yeah, I'll try and help a little bit. And obviously, you'll obviously contact for the scrutiny process for that. I mean, what I do know is obviously I've been in, as well as holding the role now, I was actually shadow for quite a number of years, and I've been involved with highways since I come on the council in 1986. So I'm familiar. I mean, what's been apparent over the last number, I can't say how many years, the list of, and obviously you're aware of for instance, the resident permit parking schemes issued a list recently of 30 schemes, but that list of 30 schemes was derived from 59 outstanding schemes from around the borough, and some of them going back 10, 12 years of permit parking schemes. So that's just one example there. So obviously that's a big blitz to try and get rid of them. Now we do have, I think there is a similar problem with potential TROs. Now there is a long list of things. I mean, hard to say waiting list, but it's probably more like a request list for starters. And so anybody who writes into the council, be it a councillor, a resident, or anything, then they might make a request. One of the things I said a couple of years ago was I wanted some more information about what this list was, because it's quite likely that some of them were unrealistic. Some of them would never happen, because obviously the resident write in and say, I want yellow lines outside my house, etc. And in some cases, it was never going to happen because there was no justifiable reason for it. Yet they weren't dealt with; they were simply added onto a list, and so this list become really, really extensively long. Now, I believe they did have a clear out of it, or at least clear up some of them some time ago. Once we get the capital programme out of the way in the next month or two, then I do actually want to look at much more detail and have a bit more time to actually look at this list of TROs in the same way we've dealt with the permit parking schemes. So there's no doubt a tremendous long list of these things, but I'm hopeful by now, and obviously you should get a confirmation. I'm sure you can write to the appropriate officer through scrutiny, actually some details of actually what this list actually is, and they were going to be categorised. Is that the full list though? I don't know. How old is that list?
Sorry,
So,
this is the list that was done about 18 months ago. And my understanding, Stephen, is that up until this point, the relevant department did not have a spreadsheet. They didn't have a comprehensive list of all the TROs that have been requested, as you say, by councillors, by residents, what have you.
or police,
and this, apart from the ones that were going to be done in 17, 18, this was then the list of those that were beyond that time scale. And I think this was also the first time that they then notionally, using the word matrix, put these into some sort of a priority order as they perceived it. And it only consists of the priority order, obviously, the location, the TRO type, such as junction protection or waiting restrictions or no waiting at any time. There's one here in Brooklands, I know, for example. And then the fourth column was request date, of when it was requested. And some of the dates were as recent as June 2017, that'd be very recent, and others down here, 25th of September 2008. So it really was a huge spread of nearly 10 years backlog. But up until that point, they didn't have a spreadsheet of all these things. And they presumably dug through all their records and at least got it down onto a few sheets of paper so they could start to deal with it, which is my sincere belief what they are now doing in a sort of a measured way.
I mean, I'll be I can't remember that report, although I probably did see it if it's 18 months ago, but I was aware there had been some changes to it, as I said a second ago, that there actually were some sort of priority drawing it together. I'll actually I'll ask that to be updated and actually see that copy myself, actually, because that'd be one of the things that I do actually want to sort out, because before that there was a problem in terms of like prioritising things. Obviously you'd want to prioritise things like disabled bays or things like that, or if there was actually needed yellow lines or dropped crossing to help facilitate people with disabilities, those sort of things would always be a priority. But there's actually always, obviously, a tremendous number of them. So I'll actually be chasing up where I looked with that list. Obviously, with so many permit parking schemes going in now, many of the items on that list, because I've actually asked about this earlier in the year, should actually be counted within that, because I know across a number of wards where there are things like yellow lines waiting to be implemented, and consideration should be given to those when they're implementing a permit parking scheme as part of that scheme. So that in itself should actually but be a big help to actually reducing the list, hopefully, in that sense. So I'll have a better idea of that. So I'm going to ask for it at a personal level, want to get the budget out of the way, and I can look at that. In terms of scrutiny, obviously I'd be quite pleased to actually, I have no problem with them. I'll just come here on whatever sort of basis you think is appropriate in that sense, so we can actually see how meaningful it's going down, because I think that is important, because previously, so as you say yourself, there was lists there was like 10 years old, and I think some have probably even older than that and probably got forgotten about and probably ceased to exist down a black hole somewhere. I completely imagine that sense. I know of a number I've requested myself, and I don't know whether they're even on that list in that sense of it. So it's one of those things, but I'm happy to support those sort of proposals.
Can I just bring a few people?
I was going to say, sorry, just unlike being unable to locate things, Steve Tilby sent me these two lists on the 6th of July 2017. I will now forward them to the exec member. I'll forward them to everyone. Can have a copy of what those lists were, So that's when I got them. So it was July 2017 when he produced the information for me.
Yeah,
so,
I think obviously it is an important issue, and there's absolutely no point, as far as I can see, having something on a list for 10 years which will never ever get done. I think it's just crazy. So I think there needs to be some review of the system that we have, and some kind of streamlining, where we have a clearer understanding of what schemes are likely to be done and what schemes are never going to ever be done. Yeah, Simon.
Thank you, Steve. Just a point on the resident parking schemes. When it comes to the consultation, I think that it would be prudent to take the periphery of these schemes that are not going to be in it, because the ones on Bowers Avenue and on there has caused a lot of problems for residents in both Davian West and Flixton Ward, with the parking that was going on Bowers Avenue just being transferred to another part within the borough, especially in Flixton, where there is within 5 minutes of all the issues of parking a free car park at the bottom of the Bird in Hand. And again, on the TROs, Western Road, I spoke to One Trafford in September of last year, and I was assured that it would be undertaken by November, and there's still nothing there, and we've had numerous accidents there. So I think they need to be a little bit more realistic in the timeframes that they're offering.
Thank you, Chair. I was just wondering if we could maybe ask the executive member if he can return to the committee in a couple of months, maybe furnished with a bit more in the way of specifics, because all of the information we've really been provided within the report in appendices 1 and 2, that doesn't strike me as being particularly concerning. It doesn't look like an overly burdensome workload, but we've had sort of anecdotal accounts from councillor boys of applications the council knows about that have just been sat in the ether doing nothing for 11 years. So that's concerning to me. So I'm just wondering if Steve could maybe be tasked with providing us with a little bit more information and some clarity, because if there is issues there about the council's capacity to get through its workload, then I think we need to do a bit more digging into that.
I think that's absolutely right. And obviously there will be an officer or officers who are assigned to do this work, to draw up the lists and so on, and to be monitoring that. So you've got some kind of coherent action plan. So I think it would be really useful if, as has been suggested, in a few months' time, to come along again, Steve, and with an officer. And to try to, get a better system, really, in terms of it all. Yes, Sophie.
Thanks, Chair. Just on the back of Aidan's question, really, is this list extensive and comprehensive? Because I'm aware that I know you can't go into specifics, but on the surface of it, it doesn't seem overly burdensome. But I am sure there must be other schemes that have probably been, kind of kicked into the long grass, if you like to use a colloquial expression, because I know there was a scheme ongoing in my own ward that it was all, all stations go, and residents were very sort of exercised about it, and then everything has gone deathly quiet about it, and nothing has been heard for about 18 months. Wellington Crescent, and that's not included on this as a list. So I think it would be really helpful to just do a little bit of delving to establish, the extent of this, and if there are schemes that are sort of lurking about that have kind of been forgotten about, maybe, and report back to us. And can I just ask you another question as well? Are these the kind of sort of schemes that would be invoked in the instance, because something we've talked about or is being mooted is maybe like play streets, where streets are closed off, aren't they, to allow children to play out? Would this kind of order be in play? I know obviously it would be temporary because it wouldn't be permanently like that, but for certain times in the week that the streets might be closed off, would that be the kind of order that would be in place for those?
On Play Street separately first. I mean, first of all, I haven't seen that appendix. I was given this report to come here with tonight, so it doesn't include any appendixes. So I was told this is the one that we were dealing with. So I apologise if I haven't seen that appendix. So I don't know what I'm referring. So I'm sorry if there's any misunderstanding on that part there. In terms of Play Street, so I've actually have recently been discussing Play Streets, and we are actually going to be bringing in some pilot areas during the course of the next 12 months. There's 3 pilot areas chosen now that they are not subject to quite the same rules in that one because they're temporary, but the residents are expected to undertake the consultation with neighbours nearby who live on the same street, and they're expected to actually post details on adjacent lampposts for people passing, so they can see this. That now, and they'll only be visually supported as long as they're not. If there's lots of objections to it from people who live there, then the council will have to reconsider. There's 3 pilots going on at the moment. There's one that I'm aware of in my own area, and I don't think there's many objections to that one, but there are 2 others. I don't know whether, obviously, once the consultation started, the residents are solely responsible for this consultation, and they got to report back to the council with the results of that consultation, and the council will consider those as well as an audit with them. And at the end of that, it's for a 12-month trial, and then the 12-month trial, we will actually analyse those results and see if they can be possibly extended into a much bigger scheme than that one. But there's a lot of things to iron out, which is why we're doing a pilot rather than a big rollout, because there's a lot of things to learn on this one and that sense of it. But in terms of other ones, so on your other point,
It was just the extent. Is this an exhaustive list of schemes that are in existence at the moment, or are there some that have kind of been forgotten about, maybe?
I mean, I'm not saying, as I said a second, I've not seen that list, so I can't comment on that one there. But I mean,
it's similar to Aidan's question, really. Can we be furnished with a little bit more information?
There are no doubt, say, lists of ones that I think a couple of people said now that have been on lists that they've actually just been forgotten about. I think some of them I think some of them were some potentially, and I think we're probably unrealistic. And I said to the office at some point, we need to actually, I said this a couple of years ago, we need to actually really be honest about these. And if some of them aren't going to happen, then just get rid of them off the list.
Absolutely.
It's actually, I mean, I'll give you one little quickie in my own ward where there was yellow lines were put down one side of the road to facilitate moving traffic. And then we had complaints from a resident on the other side of the road. He said, you put them on my side of the road, I demand you put them on the other side of the road there so that they got the same problems I have. And we said, no, we're not just there to actually annoy people, we're actually there to serve a purpose. But he actually did request your line to put that in form list be requested, so there's lots of things like that in the system, no doubt, where have just simply been added, and they were simply unrealistic and were never going to happen. So I mean, I think it was about being honest with them, and they weren't going to happen, just simply remove them. So it's something that when I get that list, I'm going to speak with officers tomorrow about this, and actually I want to see that list, and I actually want to be a lot more but I'll be looking at it, look more scrutinise a lot more detail of it once I get the budget out of the way, or I should say it should be part of, because we have an allocation with the budget for these sorts of things, so it'll actually be seeing where they can fit in.
Okay, Chris.
Yeah, just to hopefully make it simpler, there are actually 3 lists knocking about at the moment. One of the lists you've got, Appendix 2, is a residence parking schemes. That is entirely separate from traffic regulation orders, which is yellow lines, double yellow lines, etc. Okay, so that's Appendix 2, so that's separate, right? What you've got on Appendix 1 is the traffic regulation orders that in 2018-19 have made it into the Do It This Year list. Now, what I forwarded to Stephen were those that made it into the Do It 17-18 year list. So that is the sort of ones that have made it onto the list that can be afforded, because there's only 20 or so schemes can be afforded within the overall budget to do the yellow lines, to do the consultation, to put up the post saying don't park here, then. Anyway, that's the second list. The third list is the ones that are pending, that haven't made it onto that list yet, and they're the ones that some of which can go back a long time. The problem is also not just that some of them might be impractical, is that this is a fluid list. If someone during the year comes up with 5 or 6 more schemes elsewhere that actually in priority order are above the scheme that you really want, whilst you might have been 18th thinking next year I'll be on the Do It Now list, suddenly you end up not 18th, you're 26th, and you've not made it into the list. And that is what has been happening as well. So it is, although it's a list, it's not just a pecking order that you inevitably rise to the top of. It doesn't work like that. Others can come in and actually displace you. So there's 3 lists. There's the residence things, the ones that are in place, hopefully to be completed this year, and then there's a balance which will still be, in my estimation, well over 100 items long in terms of pending, and a lot have been pending for getting on for almost 10 years. And residents have probably moved out of the area since they asked for them.
Right. I think to kind of wind this up, because we can end up in just going in circles, really. And I think what Aidan has suggested seems sensible to me, that in a few months' time, if you could come along again, Steve, with an officer, looking at whatever list that we've got, and trying to enable us to understand how we can actually improve the lists that we do have, what the priorities are, and what the communication is really in terms of those lists, because it does appear that there's a lot of confusion because nobody actually knows, to any sensible degree on what are priorities and what are not priorities. And I think we need that kind of sorting out, and presented to us in a way that we understand. And obviously, if you can't do it, overnight, then we would want to monitor how that will be progressing in the future. So if you're comfortable with that, Steve, then we'll bring you back on this.
Yeah. Will the officers formally write to request that?
But
Will the officers? That's fine.
Yeah,
so I don't have to do it personally.
yeah.
That makes it more official. Then that's fine.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
No, I think you're absolutely right. And Alex, I think, probably capture most of that, if you've understood what we've talked about. But that would be helpful, to put that into writing to you. And
Yes, I have no problem with that. That'd be really helpful. Be a
that's
pleasure.
great. That's Steve. We'll appreciate that. Yeah, great. Yeah, thanks, Steve. Item 7. This is what we alluded to in our budget report. What we're seeking to do here is to set up and establish a new task and finish group, with regard to the motion that was put forward to the council in November on the climate emergency. And if you look near to the bottom, it lists a number of things that was requested of us, and that is seek advice from experts to develop a carbon budget and set a challenging target date for carbon neutrality in Trafford. Consider systematically the climate change impact of each area of the council's activities, make recommendations and set an ambitious time scale for reducing these impacts, to assess the feasibility of requiring all report risk assessments to include carbon emissions appraisals, including presenting an alternative approach which reduce emissions wherever possible. Report to full council with the actions the council needs to take to address this emergency. So that is almost a scoping of what the task and finish group would do. We would confine it to Trafford, but you can go beyond that in terms of procurement and all of that kind of activity, and obviously leading the way will help enormously in informing business and so on. It is a big piece of work, and we will be asking for volunteers amongst the scrutiny members. I think across the 3 scrutiny committees, I would suggest, and I think some kind of notification will be going out 2 scrutiny members. I think in the near future, I think Alex, you might have been mentioned in terms of that, and so we'll be asking for expressions of interest to go on to that task and finish group, and then the first meeting will look at the scoping. We will need some funds to have some kind of expert who can come and speak to us, but I think that will have to be done in a legal manner for that procurement. Yeah, Ray.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to say this scrutiny committee has got several task and finish groups on the go, and I happen to be on all of them so far. And I just wondered, and on this particular one, I thought when we started the scrutiny group years ago, we said that other members of the council would be welcomed onto these task and finish groups. And I just wonder, I mean, there are people out there on the council that are far more qualified on climate change than I am, and it might be more helpful. But there's a limit to how many task and finish groups we can take on board. And I just wanted to open up the...
Yeah. No, I mean, I don't know what was agreed previously, but I would be more than happy. Obviously, in terms of scrutinising the executive members can't be on there. But I think this is, there are, a number of councillors who probably would want to go on, who are not necessarily on the scrutiny committee. So, I would welcome anybody who wishes to go on, quite frankly. Yeah.
Well, just following up on that, I did, before writing this, check with Democratic Services. They said that any councillor, perhaps they said not on the exec, that wasn't one of my concerns, was potentially could be involved.
The only thing I was just going to add was I didn't know whether a discussion had already been had about how much work the combined authority is already doing on this, because obviously it's a priority, the Greater Manchester Mayor. And I know that we, I think maybe 2 or 3 committee meetings ago, did have a state of the conurbation report circulated to us. And there was reference in that report to the priority about making Greater Manchester carbon neutral within Andy Burnham's time frame that he set. So I just didn't know whether or not we might be duplicating work. Or...
Yeah, I raised exactly the same point with Richard Rowe, and what we came up with really was to invite the lead officer of GM, who's obviously leading on this matter, because you're right, we don't want to duplicate, and we won't duplicate. So bringing that person along to give us advice as well on what they're already doing, and how we can actually meet the targets that GM have set, and so yeah, that would be, we'd be inviting them very early on in the process. Yeah. So with that, if there's no other questions, we will be setting up that task and finish group as soon as we possibly can, and then we'll sort out a first meeting, I think, just to get together and expand on the motion that went to council, and look to see who we might invite as soon as we possibly can. And I think whether it's an expert or the GM lead officer, or both, that will come to a meeting shortly after the first meeting. Yeah. Is that okay? All right. Thank you for that. Move on to item 8. this is the work programme, really, just for information. I just mention on page 35 the One Trafford Partnership Review, the Task and Finish group that's been set up. I think I've been working behind the scenes with the officers to draw up a report, finalise a report, which I will be sharing with the Task and Finish group in the near future, and with recommendations on how we might move forward, and recommend to the to the executive, and I may, depending on what the Task and Finish group says, might call a further meeting of the Scrutiny Committee, this committee, to just sign off the report, and that would probably happen in February at some point. So those that are on the Task and Finish group, I will notify them of a meeting in the near future. Okay, I don't know whether there's anything else on there that you wanted to mention. Yeah,
I appreciate the reports just for noting, but I was just wondering when I read through it, the question of fire safety in high-rise tower blocks, I was wondering if we could just maybe find out when we're due the update, because I remember raising my concerns with the lack of progress that THT appear to have made with the high-rise blocks in Clifford, but also my concerns about the blocks which aren't cladded, Magnolia Court in my ward, for instance. And I know that the executive member said that he was going to look into the question about whether more work can be done in those blocks that aren't cladded as well. So I was just wondering if we could maybe get an update soonish. Thanks, Chair.
Yeah, and I think I raised the issue about sprinklers as well. So I think we could roll it all up. Hopefully, bring something to the next next scrutiny committee, which I don't know when it is. Is it in 2 months' time? Is it? Yeah, 13th of March, right? Yeah, so we could bring something to that meeting. Yeah. Okay. Right. Sorry. Yeah.
This is. I'm just trying to recall this. It's partly on the Task and Finish, the Amy one. I can't remember when we met. Some of us met with Julie, whatever her name is, not another person. I think we were once again talking then about having at least a few names of people at Amy that actually had overall responsibility for whatever it was, highways or parks or whatever. And I think we were promised, oh yeah, you can have this. But it's another one of these. Well, yes, you can have it, but we never seem to get it, or I certainly haven't. Is there a way of sort of just
there was a list that was given to us from?
I realise it's a bit fluid because it does change quite frequently. The personnel.
It does. Well, let's raise it at the Task and Finish group for the time, because I'm going to bring a report. Yeah. All right. Well, that takes us on to item 9, urgent business, which I don't have any. So can I thank you all for your attendance and your contributions?
Okay.